Thank you for checking out Coastal Community Church. We hope that you receive hope and encouragement through this week's message. If this ministry has impacted your life in any way, please share your story at mystory@coastalcommunity.tv. We hope you enjoy the service.
Well, good morning, Coastal. How's everybody doing? Awesome. Hey, my name is Steve. I'm one of the pastors here at Coastal, and I'm excited to be able to be here at our Pompano campus this morning. Well, it's not this morning. It's today with all of you guys. I'm used to saying this morning over at Coconut Creek. But I'm also excited not just to be here, but to be able to continue in this series that we've been doing for the month of November called No Fear November. And we've been basing this series off of the verse from 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 that says this: "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." Now, in this series, we've heard some messages from Pastor TJ as he talked about overcoming fear. He talked about the fear of intimacy and how that holds us back. And then last week, Shayla spoke about insecurities and how those affect us. And I just want to say that if you've missed any of those first three messages, I want to encourage you to hit up our website this week, watch the video if you missed a message, or download the podcast. But you do not want to miss some of the stuff that's in these. There's some incredible information in those messages from TJ and from Shayla. Now, this week, I was thinking about this message, and I was remembering back to some of the things that TJ had talked about. TJ shared about some phobias. He kind of picked some funny phobias and fears to talk about that people have. And do you know what I found out about those phobias that people have? The first thing that I learned is this, that the most common phobia or fear that people have is the fear of public speaking. And that's not really all that life-shattering. It's not really all that interesting by itself. But when you find out that the second most common fear or phobia is dying, then you have to ask yourself the question, seriously, are there more people afraid of speaking in public than dying? Like, it's just kind of strange to me. And I thought, man, this is crazy to think that more people are afraid of public speaking than actually dying. And so I had to ask, like, what is all that about? And how could that possibly be true? So here's my hypothesis as to why more people are afraid of public speaking than dying. People are afraid to look foolish. I think people are afraid to look foolish. And honestly, if you stand up in front of a group of people that have assembled to hear you speak, then there's an expectation that you have something worthwhile to say, or something interesting to say, something entertaining. In the case of preaching, something life-changing, possibly. And with those kinds of expectations, let's be honest, there is a real chance that you could look foolish. I mean, who wants to pull a Steve Harvey when they get up and speak? Anybody remember the 2015 Miss Universe? Where Steve Harvey, he announces the winner of the Miss Universe pageant. And he announces that the winner is Miss Columbia. And Miss Columbia gets that giant bouquet of flowers. And then all those people come up and they put the crown on her head, and you know how they got to bobby pin them into their crazy like pageant hair? So they're bobby pinning this crown in, and she's taking her little walk. You know, she's crying. She just won Miss Universe. And then Steve Harvey gets back on the mic and he says, "Hey, folks, actually, I'm sorry. Miss Columbia is the first runner-up. The Miss Universe for 2015 is Miss Philippines." And they literally have to remove the crown from Miss Columbia's head and put it on Miss Philippines. Nobody wants to look foolish when they get up in front of somebody and speak. Nobody wants to look foolish at all. About 5 years ago, I was working at a church, and they had what they would call they called it like a family retreat, an all-church retreat. And so you could have all these people, moms and dads with their kids of all ages, and they would go away, and they would sort of take over this campground or retreat center, and they would spend the whole weekend together, and they would have activities and meals, and then they'd have different sessions where they had worship and then a speaker that we'd brought in. And so my job for this weekend, I was the MC. I was kind of moving everything along, keeping things going, and getting each session lined up. And so I'm there, and they had this little problem of when the session was supposed to start, everybody was still kind of up talking and grabbing coffee and snacks. You guys wouldn't know anything about that, would you? We don't have that problem. But so I had to think of something like, instead of just starting the session and having like half the people miss some of the important stuff in the session, we're like, how do we get them to kind of all come in and sit down? So I thought up that we'd start each session. I would get up and say, hey, who wants to come up on stage and share with everybody here a stupid human trick? Just to kind of get people laugh and break the ice. Well, nobody wanted to share. It was just like, no hands go up, and I'm like, well, okay, I'll do a stupid human trick first. And so I did one of my stupid human tricks, and that kind of broke the ice. People laughed, and then a few more hands went up, and some people came up and did it. And the interesting thing was that every single session that we had throughout the weekend, I would say, all right, time for stupid human tricks. Who wants to come up and do it? And like, nobody'd raise their hand until I did one first. Had to break the ice. Now, luckily, I'm very capable. I have lots of stupid human tricks that I can share. But only after someone would kind of get people laughing at them, only after I would look foolish first would other people come on up. And I think it's this fear of foolishness that keeps us from raising our hand in the 4th grade, because what if we don't know the right answer? It's the fear of foolishness that keeps us from asking somebody out on a date, because what if they say no? It's the fear of foolishness that when we're in college, it keeps us from changing our major even though we hate every class that we're taking. It's the fear of foolishness that keeps us from looking for another job that would be more fulfilling even though we dread waking up and going to work every day. I think it's also the fear of foolishness that stops us from asking God and praying for miracles in our life. Now, I want to talk about this fear of looking foolish, because I think that it's one of the things that holds so many of us back from allowing God to do some amazing things through us. Now, if I were to ask you, how many of you guys would love to see God do something amazing, to do a miracle in your life? How many of you guys would love to? Yeah, a lot of hands go up. What if I said, how many of you would love for God to use you to do a miracle in someone else's life? Yeah, but the problem is, I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee that God will use you and that you won't look foolish. I can't guarantee that the way that he wants to use you isn't going to require you to go way out on a limb for him. And so the problem is that because I can't guarantee that you're not going to have to go way out on that limb, the problem is that I can't guarantee that you're not going to look a little bit foolish or crazy in the eyes of this world, then so many of us have that fear of looking foolish that kicks in. It's very real. And so when that fear kicks in, most of us respond in one of the 3 ways that I'm going to talk about. Now, some of us do one of these and some of us do a combination, but for many of us, we respond by freezing. We freeze. So some of us, we freeze. Now, my son, Evan, he's currently 10 years old, but a few years ago, like when he was in the age, like between 5 and 7, he was a freezer. So he'd be sitting on the couch, watching a cartoon or something and drinking a big glass of chocolate milk, because kids always drink chocolate milk. And so somehow, inexplicably, he would spill that entire glass of milk, like all over himself and all over the couch. And he would sit there with this like look of terror on his face. He would spill it and just freeze solid and be like, ah. And my wife and I, like, we've learned maybe him freezing was a preconditioned response to the overreaction of my wife and I that would be screaming at him, get up, get a towel, soak it up before it soaks into the cushions. We might have caused some of that freezing, but he would just sit there frozen, not being able to respond. Now, he was a freezer, but as we get older, we like to make our reactions seem a little bit more mature. And so we'll, instead of saying, well, I freeze when I'm kind of in fear, we have the paralysis of analysis as adults, right? We like to put a nice term to it. You guys know what paralysis of analysis is? It's when we've got a decision to make, but we're afraid of making the wrong decision. We're afraid that it's going to cause us to look foolish if we make the wrong decision. And so instead of making that decision, we just analyze the situation over and over and over. We'll sit there and figure out every possible outcome, good and bad, that could happen if we make this decision. We'll list out the pros and we'll list out the cons, and we stress out about it. And we do that until we've spent so much time doing those things that the time to actually make the decision has now passed, and we can't make it any longer because it's been made for us. And so what we'll do is we'll just move on to the next big decision and probably not make that one either because we freeze. Early in my ministry, this kind of described me. I was in student ministry, and I was always afraid that, like, anytime I did something big, anytime I made a change or I tried something new, I was always afraid that, like, none of the students would show up. Like, I'd just show up there by myself, and my church would be like, man, you stink at this youth ministry thing, and that would be the end of that. But I was on staff for a while at a church. It was a pretty large church, and so I was the junior high youth pastor, and I had a guy that I worked with that was the high school youth pastor, and his name was Dino. Now, Dino was the exact opposite. Dino had no fear that he would ever be wrong. Like, whatever he thought of in ministry was going to be the next greatest idea that could possibly have ever been thought of for student ministry. We were planning an event one time. You can imagine that planning events together was sort of an interesting process with the paralysis of analysis guy and then the guy who didn't think he could ever be wrong and nothing would ever fail. And so we were planning an event for the community that we were doing. It was like 700 or 800 kids were going to be at this thing, and we were trying to come up with a band that could lead worship and some entertainment. And so Dino's the type that's like, hey, let's just call like Penn and Teller, see if they'll leave their Vegas act for a little bit and come do our entertainment, and then we'll get like Taylor Swift, see if she'll come lead worship. I mean, why not? And I'm just like, dude, you're nuts. And he's like, let's shoot for the stars. Well, it actually worked out really well for me to be hanging out with him so much and to be working through those events because he would push and challenge me to stop thinking about all of the things that could go wrong and start reaching for something like, wow, what if? Like, let's give it a shot. Let's try it. It was really good for us and good for me to push past those fears. So some of us, in this fear of looking foolish, we freeze. Others, we run. Others of us run. One of the funniest family memories that I share with my mother is a time when I don't know how old I was exactly, like 8 to 10 years old, somewhere in there. And I had heard this catchy little song on the radio, probably in my mom's car or something like that. I'd heard this song played. Stupid song from a guy named Brian Hyland. It was from an album in 1960 called Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini. Some of you are already laughing. To this day, I have no idea what that song was about. I don't know the point or the purpose of the song. I'm sure that there's like verses of the song that explain why he's singing about this, but I didn't know what it was. And there was one line of the chorus, not even the whole chorus, just one line of the chorus that I could not get out of my head. Here's all that I could remember. It was an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini that she wore for the first time today. That's it. That's where I knew nothing else. There was more of a chorus, but I couldn't remember any of it. I just had that one line stuck in my head. I hope all of you have that stuck in your head for the rest of the day. But so I'm in the shower one evening, and for some reason I remember I was in my parents' like master bathroom. My brother must have been in our bathroom or something like that. And so I'm in the shower, and I like to take long showers. I have ever since I was a kid. Like, I'll just sit in there till the hot water runs out. So I'm in my parents' shower, just letting the water run, and I'm singing that line like over and over and over again. And that's the only part I remember, so it's just that line. If I said it 10 times, I sang it 100 times. Now, unbeknownst to me, my mother decided that this was a prime opportunity to hide in her bedroom and wait for me to come out. So as the hot water finally runs out, I get out of the shower, I dry off, I wrap myself in a towel, and I'm going to head out of their bathroom through the room to my room to get dressed. And so as I walk out of the bathroom into my mother's room, she says, "It was an itsy bitsy teeny weeny," and she scared me so bad that I drop my towel, and I take off on a full naked sprint out of her bedroom, and I don't even attempt to make the turn into the hallway. Like, I just go through the door, and I smack straight into the hallway wall opposite her room. I crumple to the ground in the fetal position. I am convinced that if that wall wasn't there, I would still be running today. Like, I'm not joking. That got me pretty good. Now, when God calls us to do something that's hard for him, we may not actually sprint like I was sprinting. We may not actually sprint away, but some of us, we do run. Our running might look different. We may say things like, hey, I'm just too busy. I can't really do that right now. There's just no room in my schedule for that activity that the church is planning that would really kind of stretch me. Or we may say things like, hey, you know what? Like, I think that's awesome. That's so cool to hear. You know what? I'll pray for you while you go do that. Or, oh man, that ministry sounds wonderful. It sounds like God's really doing some awesome stuff. Can I make a donation to your ministry? Like, how can I make a charitable contribution? We avoid actually getting our hands dirty for the Lord. We may not be running physically, but we're still running. So some of us, in that fear of looking foolish, some of us freeze and some of us run. And some of us, we just do something stupid. We just make really, really bad decisions. I was trying to think of a time that I could share where I did something stupid out of this fear, and I had a hard time narrowing it down to a story. So instead, I want to give you a biblical example so that you'll know that you're in really good company here with this one. So before we read from Genesis chapter 12, I want to highlight what's happening. In this incredible story that we're about to read, God has chosen a man named Abram to be the father of the nation of Israel. So God has picked Abram, and he's told him that there's going to be a great nation that's going to come from Abram. And that God is going to make a covenant with that nation. So with that, and with all the people, all of the descendants of Abram, God is going to make a covenant with them, and they are going to be the chosen people of God. So here's what chapter 12 says. It says, the Lord had said to Abram, leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. Now, that's a pretty sweet deal right there. At this point, Abram's got to be feeling pretty good. God has just said, I'm going to make a nation out of you, and I'm going to bless anyone who blesses you, and I'm going to curse those who treat you with contempt. But now, check this out. 7 verses later, not 7 chapters, 7 short verses after what I just read, it says this. At that time, a severe famine struck the land of Canaan, forcing Abram to go down to Egypt, where he lived as a foreigner. As he was approaching the border of Egypt, Abram said to his wife Sarai, look, you are a very beautiful woman. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Let's kill him, and then we can have her. So please, tell them you're my sister. Then they will spare my life and treat me well because of their interest in you. Okay, so Abram, on his way to Egypt, is like, hey, babe, you know how I'm always telling you that you are smoking hot, right? Yeah, well, see, you are so fine that when we roll up into Egypt to get some food, all of the dudes in Egypt are going to look at you and they're going to be like, "Who, man, what is she doing with that Abram guy?" And now, see, sweetie, because they're going to think that you're so beautiful, then they're going to want you for themselves. Now, I'm married to you and you're married to me, and since we're married, they're going to think, well, if I want Sarai because she's so hot, I got to get rid of Abram. So they're going to kill me so that they can have you. It's okay. I've got a plan. I have this plan. See, okay, check this out. Just tell them you're my sister. Yeah, see, tell them you're my sister. No, this is all good. See, then they won't kill me. Now, I mean, sure, you're going to have to marry some other dude, but at least we'll be able to eat, right? And all the ladies in the house gave their man the stink eye right about now, right? It's just a horrible, horrible idea that Abram has because he's afraid. This was the guy that God had just chosen 7 verses before and said, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And I'm going to not just make a great nation, but I'm going to make a covenant with you and all of your descendants. And I'm going to bless those who bless you, and I'm going to curse those who treat you with contempt. So he just receives these blessings, and then he's afraid going into Egypt. and just does something really, really stupid. And I think it's a great illustration for us that sometimes out of our fear, we just make really, really dumb decisions. So when God is moving in our life, when God is wanting us and he's calling us to do something big for him, what do we do so that in our fear, we don't freeze and we don't run and we don't do something really stupid? And this is the reason that we're talking about this today. Because I believe that what we do with our fear determines what God does through us. What we do with our fear determines what God does through us. So if we can all agree here today that freezing or running or doing something stupid is not a good response to God moving in our life, then what do we need to do with that fear? The first thing I think we need to do is that we need to rely on community. Rely on community. Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 24, says this: "Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." Some of you guys know that this past summer in June, Coastal sent a mission trip to South Africa. And it was almost a year ago now. It was actually last December that they had the first meeting. It was just an interest meeting. Hey, if you're interested in finding out about what we do on this mission trip to South Africa, come to this meeting. And so I was at the meeting, and there was a young woman from this church. Many of you guys know her. Her name's Jasmine Rodriguez. Jasmine, I asked her for permission to share the story, so she said yeah. And so I remember Jasmine being there at this interest meeting. And at the end of the meeting, after hearing how the whole thing was going to go, she went over to the sign-up sheet. She signs her name, and then she's like floating around on her tiptoes. She's so excited that she's going to do this trip. She's like, man, I'm going. I'm so excited. I can't wait. She was just on cloud 9. And then during the 6 months from December to June, from the day she signed up all the way 6 months later to the day of departure, Jasmine dealt with fear. Did I make the right decision? Should I really be going on this trip? Am I going to be able to raise all of the money it takes to get there? Oh, money. How am I going to ask people for money? Who am I? Who am I to think that I can go to South Africa and help anybody there? I mean, I can't even keep my life together here in the States. How am I supposed to be helpful for anybody else? Jasmine dealt week after week, month after month, fear after fear. I can't tell you how many times I showed up at our Coconut Creek campus at 5:30 a.m. on a Sunday as part of our setup team. And Jasmine was on the setup team, and I would see her and say, hey, Jasmine, morning, how you doing? And more often than not, one of her responses had something to do with how much she was freaking out about this mission trip coming up. Now, the good news is I wasn't the only one that Jasmine was telling about these fears of hers. She was very open with a number of people from Coastal about the fears that she had about this trip, and she would ask people to pray for her. She would talk to people about it, and people were constantly reassuring her that everything was going to be fine. Don't back out, Jasmine, they kept saying. God is going to use this experience in your life. Jasmine didn't back out. I remember the first time that I saw Jasmine when she returned home from South Africa. And the first time I saw her, it was just a few days later. I said, Jasmine, how was South Africa? And she was like unable to frame a complete sentence, trying to express and trying to tell me how incredible the trip was, how she had seen God move in her team, how she had seen God use her to minister to others, and how God had ministered to her in this life-changing experience. If Jasmine hadn't relied on the community, if she hadn't relied on her friends here at Coastal that were encouraging her and praying for her, if she hadn't done that for those 6 months, I really don't believe that she would have gotten on that plane and gone on the trip. But she did. She did rely on community, and by sharing all of her fears with those who cared about her, she was able to allow God to do something amazing through her. So it's important that when we have these fears of looking foolish, of going out on a limb for God, that we rely on community. The second thing that we need to do is that we need to give God control. We need to give God control. Some of you guys know my son, Evan. My son is 10 right now, but his mom and I happen to think he's the coolest kid in the world. He's got an incredible sense of humor. He's really quick-witted. He's very thoughtful, and he's a great friend. Anybody that knows him loves to hang out and to play with him. And so I could go on and on talking about how great I think my son is. But what I want to share is something that has happened this last year that really caught us off guard. It totally surprised us. This last year, Evan started dealing with anxiety. And I'm not talking about like the nervously munching on your fingernails kind of anxiety. I'm talking about like full-blown panic attacks. And my wife, Katie, and I, we had no idea where this had come from. We didn't know why it had started. We didn't know how to help him. So we're trying everything that we can try to help him. Because this anxiety is getting so bad during this last year that it was stopping him from doing the things that he likes. He would have panic attacks and not be able to go to baseball practice, and he loved playing baseball. He stopped going over to friends' houses when they'd call because he was afraid that he might have too much anxiety or panic attack then. He was even having a hard time coming to church here at Coastal and going into the kids' ministry, which he loved. And so in one of those kind of moments of anxiety, one of those times where he was kind of starting to get that panic mode, I asked him, I said, Evan, what do you feel? What are the things that are going through your mind when this is happening? And of course he said, well, fear. I'm afraid. But he also shared that he's angry at himself. I'm so mad at myself for having to go through all this. I'm so mad that this is even a problem. He felt like a failure. He even said in the middle of it, he said, it just feels like God is far away. The hardest part for his mom and I was that he had no mercy at all for himself. He used to just get so mad and so angry at himself because he was like, he thought he was causing us a problem. I'm ruining our family. I'm making life so hard for you. He had no mercy on himself as he struggled through this. He felt unworthy of our love as his parents. And so obviously we're reading everything we could get our hands on. We're reading books, and I'm searching stuff on the internet. We were seeing a specialist that could help us to understand it. Anything that we could think of, we were trying it. And then something really amazing happened. At the last night of worship that Coastal did that took place this past summer, we went to the night of worship, and Evan, at that point, like we showed up at church, and for whatever reason, because we didn't understand it, he started getting that panicky feeling, and so he was uncomfortable going into the kids' ministry because he was just kind of getting that anxiety boiling up. And so instead, he was sitting in the front row with my wife during the worship night. And at one point, he grabs my wife's hand, and he looks up at her, and through tears, he just says, I can't do this. And he was starting to panic. And at that point, my wife, at the end of her rope, started praying. She'd prayed a lot about this. We both had. But at this time, Katie prayed something different. She said to God, God, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help my son. Nothing that we're trying, nothing I'm saying seems to be helping. It's not making a difference. And God, I love my son too much to see him like this. So God, he's yours. I'm giving him to you. Please help him. Now, my wife told me later that through our entire time as our son's parent, through his entire life, he has been her son. That night, though, she said, God, he's yours. And then right as she was praying that, the coolest thing happened. Evan leaned into her, and he gave her a hug, and my wife said that she could feel his entire body relax. And she knew right at that point that something had happened. So she looked at him, and he looked up at her and he said, hey, can we go outside? And she knew that this wasn't, I need to escape. I'm in the middle of a panic attack. Please get me out of here. This was something different. So she said, sure. And she took him outside the auditorium, and he said, can I tell you something, Mom? And of course she said, yeah, what? And he said, you know, when you were praying in there, I just felt like God had given me a message. And he described it. He said that I closed my eyes, and even though there was lights moving around like our worship nights have and a lot of noise and the music was loud, he closed his eyes, and everything was dark. It was pitch black. And he said, I could see way off in the distance. It would start small, just like a little white light. And as it got bigger or closer to me, it got bigger and bigger, and it was a word. And I could read words, and I knew that God was giving me a message. Here's the words that he received. Hope, faith, belief, mercy, and then show mercy. And he told my wife, he said, I knew that last one, show mercy, was God telling me that I need to show mercy to myself as I deal with my anxiety and as I struggle through this and as I learn how to cope with this. And that night was the beginning of a process and a story of healing that's been taking place ever since. You know, it was an incredible experience, a really cool experience for him, obviously, but also for us as parents, because it reminds us not to hold on too tight. You know, we need to give God control when we're afraid. When my wife was afraid for my son, she had to give God control. She had to say, he's not mine, God, he's yours. 1 Peter 5:6 says, so humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time he will lift you up in honor. You know, guys, it's humbling to acknowledge before God that you can't provide your child with what they need. And then to be able to release your child into his care. But when we face fears, we need to remember that the truth is that in many situations we are inadequate. We don't have the strength, we don't have the smarts or the resources or the talent or the you fill in the blank. And that's why we're afraid. We may not possess the tools that we need, but God does. So we need to release control to God. Now, the third thing that we need to do is that we need to have the courage to move in God's strength. You know, one of my favorite stories in the Bible is a very familiar, it's a common story to be told in church, and it's the story of David and Goliath. Now, most of you have heard the story in some way, shape, or form, but let me just sort of set the scene here. The Israelites, the chosen people of God, they're in a battle with the Philistine army. And the Philistines have brought out their greatest warrior, this guy named Goliath. Now, Goliath is not just some ordinary dude that happens to be a great warrior. Goliath is a giant. He's 9 foot 9 inches tall. His armor weighed 125 pounds, and just the iron tip of his spear weighed 15 pounds. And so the Israelite army is on one hill, and the Philistine army is on another hill. And there's a valley in between them. And in the morning, Goliath, this giant, he comes down to the valley, and he calls out the Israelite army. He says, hey, send your best warrior, and if that warrior defeats me, then the entire Philistine army will surrender and submit to you. But if I beat you, if I beat your warrior, then the entire Israelite army must surrender to us, the Philistines. Now, all of the Israelite warriors are afraid, so none of them volunteer to go to the valley and fight Goliath. And this actually happens for 40 days. Goliath goes out every morning, makes the challenge. All the Israelites are afraid. Nobody goes. Now, to make a long story short, David is just a little shepherd boy. And his dad has sent him out with some food to go give some food to his older brothers who are in the Israelite army. He's supposed to just give them food, check on them, and see how they're doing. So when David gets there, he hears about this giant Goliath, and he hears how afraid the Israelites are, and that none of them will go and fight him. And so David goes up to the king, King Saul. He goes right up to the king, and he says this in 1 Samuel 17, verse 32. Don't worry about this Philistine, David told Saul. I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy, and he's been a man of war since his youth. But David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. And the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. And so then David, he walks out down to the valley to fight the giant Goliath with nothing but a sling and a handful of stones. And with one shot, he kills the giant Goliath. Now, it's not because he was bigger or stronger or faster or more experienced or a greater warrior or better equipped or more skilled. He defeated the giant because he had the courage to move in God's strength. And I think that we all want to see God move. We want him to use us to do something amazing for him. We all raised our hand earlier when I asked that question. But see, in order for that to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be put in situations where God has to move. The reality is, though, that most of us, we want a safe Christianity. We want a safe and secure type of a life, full of ease and comfort, a life where there's no risk involved. So, you know what many of us do is that we pray. We'll say something like, we say, Lord, I want to see you do a miracle in my life. Use me, God, to do something amazing for your kingdom. But then in the very next breath, we'll pray, but Lord, please keep me out of any situation in life in which a miracle would actually be required. Keep me out of any situation in life that would be too hard for me to handle in my own strength, with my own talents, with my own resources. Because see, God, anytime the situation's too big for me to handle, I get afraid. But that's the moment. Those are the very moments that God is setting us up to see him moving in our life, accomplishing amazing things in and through us with his strength in our weakness. You know, guys, if we want God to use us, if we want to be able to overcome that fear of looking foolish for him so that we can be used for something amazing in his kingdom, then we need to do just a few things. We need to rely on community. We need to make sure that we're relying on community. We need to give God the control. Stop thinking we can do it all on our own. And we need to have the courage then to move in God's strength.
Thank you for checking out Coastal Community Church. We hope that you receive hope and encouragement through this week's message. If this ministry has impacted your life in any way, please share your story at mystory@coastalcommunity.tv. We hope you enjoy the service.